Welcome. In person, live, real, here, together. Big room, maybe a bit too formal. We'll see if we'll continue using this space versus the barn. But I felt it was important that we could all gather like this because we're looking to see how to use this building to support the residential program and those who live here. And the way that you can join me physically over time when I do these broadcasts. This isn't being currently broadcast, but it's being recorded, so it could be a broadcast. So it is really with us, but not guaranteed. So when we gather, it's always an opportunity for me to kind of focus down into the lived reality of what it means to be here, but also aspects of the teaching that I'm throwing out there or creating to look how that might gestate into another expression of this work. So you're kind of like the test grounds. Of course, it's always been my laboratory. Residential program was always the arena where I could watch and observe and test and poke and all the rest of it to see what worked. Because when I started this, there was really not a handbook. The reference of my teacher was not a good example for being in the West. And he claimed territory as the guru, and everybody had to worship him. And if it wasn't in line with that, well, they didn't get to participate. And he had a whole culture that joined in. But here in the West, we're used to being convinced. What am I getting for my time, for my money? What's the payoff, right? So he didn't have much patience for that or a recognition of that. But being a Westerner myself, I knew that we need to be able to find the value, recognize the value for ourselves in order for us to commit to something more than we would usually do. And it's also true that in the past, there were not people called by that inner aspiration and longing as there is now. There was not nearly the level of commitment that there is now, or willingness as there is now. So in many ways, the residential program is evolving outside of that into an opportunity for people to dedicate a piece of their lives to live in the energetic field of this work and to participate intimately, personally with each other in serving the manifestation of that work. So it's not a retreat. It may be a forward. It's not a place to hide out, or for very long. It used to be. We called it a spiritual retirement home for a long time, where people just lived in the bubble of their transcendence or the companionship and the relationship. And mostly it was then all the complaints and dissatisfactions and all the usual things without much ownership, without much recognition. But that didn't last long. Part of it was the recognition that we weren't ready, that we weren't able to hold or to demand what needed to be demanded in order for people to stay long enough to recognize the value. So it's all speaking to how do you make something real in this dimension? So for me, this physical building is evidence of the persistent intention to make a place for the Supreme to land and to be a place where those who come tap into that possibility, because it is a miracle domain. It's a domain where miracles happen, where things that wouldn't be possible become possible. The absolutely startling, unexpected shifts from the way you've lived up until now. A reality changer. The ultimate truth that I had to own and recognize is that no guru, no teacher can do it for you unless you are fully willing and capable of collaborating. Then any teacher will do, up to a point. So it's really about developing your own capacity to get value out of life, to get value out of challenges and tests. But you bring with you all the content of your humanity, all the bits and pieces of you that is not yet grown up, not yet aligned. They're all here. And for those of you who stay for just relatively short periods of time, if that doesn't necessarily come up, but those of you who are here for long term, definitely comes up. So how do you stay here? What keeps you here? What would have you be engaged at the level where there's no longer the apparency, or you've grown used to the opportunity of being here in such a way that it's not apparent that you couldn't just go off and do it yourself at any one point? What keeps you engaged with this teacher, this set of situations? Well, it's love. It's love. The recognition. Love is the recognition of our divinity in another. Even if we don't think we're the source of it. Love is always this movement into relationship, and we find an arena where that love can grow deeper. Then it becomes our gold mine, where we can dive deeply into the parts of ourselves that are still acting out strategies of your inherited patterns, still bypassing the things that actually are up for you to address, but which you're not meeting or not recognizing are coming up and overtaking you. You could say it's self-love. In fact, it is that. So why do we stay? Why do we persist? What is it? It's not our ego. It's how much we've given ourselves over to something greater. And the way we do that is through sacrifice, through letting go, through self-giving. The pain in our life and the perpetuation of pain are the habits of taking actions based on perpetuating our self already existing egoic identity, emotionally, mentally, physically. And as long as that's running us and we've not reclaimed the territory, it's not yet been converted into an ally. It's still failing and still defeating you in ways that you can't see. It's only when we find a purpose greater than what serves our ego. Although in fact, this does ultimately serve the conversion of our ego. Interimly, it's a self-giving. It's a sacrificing. It's a willingness to persist. We Westerners can't help but act. I mean, most of humanity is acting. Even the sannyasis on the side of the road, they may be acting less. And some of them, I can guarantee, not some, many of them are perpetuating the unmet egoic paradigms that are going to have them come back out of their little transcendences because they're not truly engaged in what it takes, which is to continue to be living life as a person, but in a context that is divine, organized around basic principles that allow us to understand and collaborate intelligently with that process. That's the Gita. So the real ashram is life. Here, we're incubating your capacity to be the ashram wherever you go. And as I listen to the groups and people who have been participating in GTP over the years, it's very clear that this is what's happening. So what will be the residential program in relationship to this? If everybody's able to be their own ashram, well, we got a very big building here. What do we do with it, right? Yeah. Did we build it for nothing? Certainly we didn't build it for show. Although it's beautiful showing. We built it to have a place for the Supreme to land. And we are the visitors. This is its house, its temple. Now you look in India and all those temples, you can say, well, all that wasted acreages, right in the middle of high price square footage. How could that, what a waste of land and time and energy. And who are those stupid, weird little people doing all that chanting? I mean, it's not in our culture to recognize what it takes to make sacred. We have to kind of create it out of nothing and then overcome our disdain for such things. Not all of us. Some of us recognizes the sacredness of it, recognizes the sacred of life, the blessing. But in order to honor the possibility that is yet to unfold in the residential program, there needs to be a demand, a sacrificing, something you wouldn't do yourself, a calling up. And what is that? It is right there in the residential program agreement. In fact, the seeds of all my work has arisen out of that residential agreement where you commit to take on certain responsibilities and we commit in turn to provide are responsible for providing something else. And we assure what we speak to, this is not about happiness. This is not about comfort or convenience or things going your way. Not about enabling the structures that have been running you your whole life. It's about calling you to go beyond them, to calling you to be of service beyond what you could do otherwise. Now we certainly speak of it all over to whoever who may listen. The Gita is the speaking to preparing Arjuna to do something he absolutely doesn't want to do. If that's not a demand, I don't know. But Krishna spent a lot of time convincing Arjuna that that is what he wanted to do. So it's the art of persuasion. It's the art of convincing you that you want this. So it's another kind of, used car salesmanship, right? The talents of selling one thing could convert to another thing should your purpose be of a different order. But persuasion really comes from something other than just what you may say, or the quality of sincerity, or of, compatibility, or friendliness, or any of those other human attributes that we use to convince other people to do what we want. But it comes from an essential conviction that the person carries. Deeper than just sincerity. Something in you recognizes it. Because that's where it starts. The Guru has no authority until you recognize the Guru. The Supreme does not exist until you can see the Supreme yourself. And then initially, of course, it's very, very rare to see it within ourselves. It's usually our worst nightmare. So we see it outwardly more easily. As the Gita says in the 12th chapter, it's easier to have the path of the recognition of the Supreme outside than to be the stripped away impersonal absolute for the human being. And so I always have said that devotion is proof of your ability to recognize the Supreme. Devotion itself is evidence that the current of the becoming that the Supreme brings in with its transmission is being experienced within yourself. So, devotion, it's a power that takes us beyond ourselves. It's that which gives us the capacity to commit. It can also be despair. Despair is another form of devotion. Despair is the recognition it's not working. There's something that I can know I am powerless. Think of Arjuna's dejection. How do I go forward? I don't know how to go forward. That too is devotion. That too is the recognition of the Supreme. When the ego, a part of the ego, can recognize its own incapacity in that moment of humility, in that moment of vulnerability, we can cross the threshold. We can pierce the veil of what it is we already are. But it's no easy journey. Crossing the threshold is one thing. Matter of fact, I was looking to read something from the Letters on Yoga. I call it piercing the veil. It's when we actually cut the membrane of the womb-like veil we live within in our ego, based on security and fear and control and doubt and confusion and anxiety and worry and stress. Cut the veil that separates us from our freedom, from our truth, from our capacity to come into existence. And I feel that Sri Aurobindo's words from almost a century ago are almost exactly my words now. I started reading Letters on Yoga somewhere about 2004, 2005, and the Gita quieted down, the Mother Book quieted down. Just in having sat at the Samadhi in Pondicherry and had met the quality of energy in Sri Aurobindo and had found that it matched the same quality of the Samadhis that I had been experiencing prior to that. And I said, he knows the same thing I know. He's holding it. It's there in the vibration of his room. And I was sitting in his room. It was full of stuff. He had a bed on one side and all kinds of things people have given him, all stretched out this large, long, narrow room. And his presence was very tangible. Very tangibly there. So I always knew that he was what I was, or I am what he is. I could recognize the quality of what he was. And over the years, I've been struggling to read. I've read most of his books, but the book that I hadn't really ever finished was Letters of Yoga. And I started reading them then. And it's where it's from his letters to devotees. He didn't meet with people much, but he did write. He was a writing fool. He wrote letters and letters upon letters upon letters upon letters. So it took a long time, 1,400 pages. And it's only in this last couple of years that I've been able to traverse the completion. Matter of fact, I almost done with the book, maybe another 100 pages. And in there, he's revealing detailed knowledge about every aspect of the spiritual path that, of course, I've seen and recognized and I speak about to you individually, or when people come up as the explanation, because I traverse the same territory he's sharing in his own realization. And it's enriching me because Sri Aurobindo built a very scientific and logical system. And it was my nature to do the similar things. We have certain similar astrological aspects that made us compatible that way. And always trying to articulate or find the science of what it is that the Gita points to. It was the Gita that awakened Sri Aurobindo. It was Krishna that came to him when he was in prison, up for murder charges, for sedition and murder. And he had no control of his life, lost control of it in prison. And it's in that point that he surrendered. And what he surrendered to, because he had the one book he had with him was the Gita, was Krishna, who showed up. Literally, he saw Krishna as if real. And then he started seeing Krishna in his guards. He started seeing Krishna in the judges. He started seeing Krishna in his cellmates. Everywhere he was looking, he was physically seeing and experiencing what at that time he called Krishna. And over the years, and that integrated, and he became that, he began his work. And that opened up his ability to see what we're doing now, that there is a shift coming, a new consciousness for humanity. And when the mother gathered with him, he came out from being a very small community of just a few guys hanging out in almost extreme poverty in Pondicherry, hiding out from the Indian police and Secret Service, and created his teachings. And the mother came and put them to work, put them in action, helped create an ashram, created a structure, created a frame so that what he was bringing could establish itself. He had the same pull I did, to create a place where I could land. I have Satsang. He had the mother of Pondicherry. Each brought this Shiva Shakti principle together and allowed for his seemingly very abstract principles to be brought into practical application. And he was the one with the mother who weaved the possibility into a clear description of the nature of the journey and the focus. So I wanted to share something today from that. And I think maybe perhaps this can be an arena where I explore the same thing I've been saying, but here it's said in other words from almost a century ago. Perhaps some of it is. And if anything, in our mind domain, when you can find a reference point from another time, that's speaking to the same thing. It gives a message of what the Gita is itself. It's a path from the ancient beginnings of humankind in which we all learn to align with or not. And the path is to come to the capacity of being able to manifest the Supreme. Not just enlightenment, though that's an important stage. Not just traversing all the subtle worlds. Not just being able to experience the ecstasies and the devotions and the darkness and the overtaking and the defeats. But that seeing what it does and how it prepares us. So I have two segments of extracts. This is called Piercing the Veil, and the next section is Crossing the Threshold. So I see that there are going to be expansions from what we're now doing in chapter 19 in terms of the applied applications of these things, but it's a wealth of detailed information about the nature and the characteristics of the journey that come to you at different times along the way. The piercing of the veil between the outer consciousness and the inner being is one of the crucial movements in yoga. For yoga means union with the divine, but it also means awakening first to your inner self and then to your higher self, a movement inward and a movement upward. It is in fact only through the awakening and coming to the front of the inner being that you can get into union with the divine. The outer physical person is only an instrumental personality, and by itself it cannot arrive at this union. It can only get occasional touches, religious feelings, imperfect imitations, and even these come not from the outer consciousness, but from what is within us. So, any time we have connected to something sacred, be it through our religious upbringing, me as a Catholic boy, 9 years old, sitting in church, deciding all I wanted to do was be able to serve Jesus, to be that moments where I connected as I developed in life, in the recognition of something greater than myself, and always seeking to apprentice myself, to sacrifice myself to every teacher that may have came. Mara Baba, first thing I did was participate, and he had worldwide meditations. It was to join that and to support that and to serve that. I recognized that for me there was a call to action. So the devotion was there from the very beginning. I became an altar boy. I entered for the first year into the preparation for the seminary to be a priest. It was this whole throwing of myself. So devotion was a theme in my life. And devotion always led to be of service, to be able to find a way where I could participate in whatever that was. All of these were not the thing itself, but they were glimmers, reflections, the scent of the divine's nearness, moments of sacredness. It could happen, of course, in the woods. It could happen at moments on a sunset or the ocean or the mountains or the spectacularness of the vast sky when you're away from the city. They're all glimmers, glimmerings of the inner being coming forward. And if you look through your life, this has been with you all along. There's no way you could be here without that capacity already there in you. It's only the insult of the outer life that prevents us from trusting that as a greater guiding compass than what we're trained to make our focus or make important. So this piercing of the veil takes many qualities. Recognizing this is useful. Also, knowing that you are a means for others to pierce the veil. When you become capable of piercing it for yourself, you become an agency for that which allows for that sacredness to awaken in another. And how do you do that? By your unquestioning sacrificing, by your devotional service, by the calling that calls you to respond and be of service to the world in whatever way that comes to you. You become a demonstration of the sacredness. And it is through that sacrifice that you create sacredness for others, through that example. There are two mutually complementary movements in piercing the veil. One, the inner being comes to the front and impresses its own normal motions on the outer consciousness, to which they are unusual and abnormal. The other is to draw back from the outer consciousness and to go inside, into the inner planes, entering the inner world of your inner self and wake in the hidden parts of your being. When that plunge has once been taken, you are marked for the yogic, the spiritual life, and nothing can efface the seal that has been put upon you. He's had long experience by this time. Something like 50, 60 years. So he speaks from the authority of having seen this happen again and again and again and again. So we share that. The validity that there is an inner being, and that we bring it, that it comes forward in the surface self, proportional to our ability to let go of those things of our surface self that would still deny it, obstruct it, resist it, or allow it to continue to run us. So the crossing, the piercing of the veil is the beginning, where we begin to align with what Sri Aurobindo calls our central self, our psychic being, the organizing authority that has choice, can choose to sacrifice or choose not to, choose to live for something more or choose not to. So that not choosing not to, of course, is veiled, is the veiled unwillingness of the human ego trying to protect and preserve whatever little sanity or order or security or happiness it's been able to claim. When we choose to let go of that, we're in risk of losing all that we know. And in those moments of choice, we are usually in a state of vulnerability that our outer self has struggled this whole life to avoid. And these vulnerabilities are the moments where we can create a new way to be, to choose a new way to be. And the way we do that, to choose vulnerability, to choose to participate from our vulnerability. We create safe containers so that the inner being can have a voice, so the inner being can be heard and validated, and to know it's worthy by others who know the very same thing in themselves. How precious is that? How rare is that? Where you can be held in the midst of your most vulnerable moments by people you don't really know very well. Be held in a vessel that allows you to be able to leap out of yourself, to bring that inner being more fully into the outer being. See, this is the new humanity. This is where it's going. It's not going where it's been. It's not about treacheries or secrets or lies or us versus them. We're better or they're inferior. It is a new paradigm. That is, for whatever reason, has to happen now. It seems the human beings only really move when there's necessity, when they have to, when there's no other option. You know, they say about Americans, they actually end up doing it right, but first they have to do everything wrong. So it is the nature of coming to the place where it becomes the necessity. And we're there now. Humanity's there. The anguish is on every level. And of course, people are speaking it in many different voices. Some of them are quite close to the truth itself, and some are in the vicinity of it, and some are in their idealism and their hope and their wishes, and some are totally caught up in their fear and their terror of the end of the world as they know it. They have good reason. That part of themselves that's still clinging has got good reasons. But you got to wake up to the paradigm. No one living will be here in 100 years. They'll all be dead. And that for some reason, we just don't get that. We're almost in a complete, absolute denial structure. Of course, if you're going to be worried about it, you have something to worry about. And we get unwittingly caught up in a structure of trying to avoid experiencing the full vulnerability of what it means to be in a body, to be vulnerable. Death, the Jiva Mukti, the term means death while living, that you're already dead while you're living. That you're not hanging on because what you have become is buddies with death or whatever you would be when you die. The inner being is your eternal self. When the inner being comes, you found the treasure trove. It'll take you through everything, giving it authority in your outer life. Now, that's the hard work. That's where we're focused right now. By giving people opportunity to serve, creating the vessels for others, to be able to bring forward their inner being and then to participate with it, that empowers them to bring that into their outer life in their relationship with their parents and their children and the people who are near to them and the people who had dominated and controlled them when they were younger, all the structures of their life that defined their sense of what was possible, and in the process unwittingly open up a new paradigm for what you are and what life is. But who do we work with? They have to have at least a glimmer. Most of this work isn't about those who are still crossing the threshold. Most of our work is people who've long ago made the inner being has come forward, and it got mucked up in the process. It's still struggling to come into existence. It's got caught up in things, and much of what Sri Aurobindo writes about is what happens in the subtle dimensions, what happens when we start crossing the transition from a human life into a divine life. The perils, the challenges, the opportunities, the organization of your attitudes. The Mother Book is pointing to this perfectly. The way we learn to come to authority with the aspiration that already lives within us, that without that aspiration, then the forces of the universe that could allow for that transformation cannot come in. We will shut it out. We will not want it. We won't know how to meet it. The inward movement takes place in many different ways, and there is sometimes a complex experience combining all the signs of the complete plunge. There is a sense of going deep down, a feeling of the movement inward, inner depths. There is often a stillness, a pleasant numbness, a stiffening of the limbs. This is the sign of the consciousness retiring from in the body under the pressure of a force above. That pressure stabilizing the body into an immovable support of the inner life and a kind of strong yet still spontaneous holding. There's a feeling of waves surging up, mounting from below up to the head, which brings an outer unconscious and inner awakening. It is an ascent of the lower consciousness to the ego to meet the greater consciousness above. He calls the ego the adhara, which I think is a better word because we have so much charge around ego. But the adhara is the error of the organization of our separate self. When we can recognize that what's coming is the error, is becoming aware of its error. So we're awakening our ego. What gets transformed isn't our being, it's our ego. It's this adhara. It's this principle of organization of a self as an outer person. The process requires ultimately the collaboration of that outer ego, of that adhara, and the conversion of it into an ally. The 6th chapter of the Gita, the little self and the big self. You want to be a friend of the big self, not its enemy. Why? Because the big self has greater authority. And if you are choosing to go battle with your being, you're going to suffer. It's inevitable, unnecessarily. And so many of us do for so long, either in self-diminishment or in separation from outer life, so many ways. It is ascending of the lower consciousness to a greater consciousness above. It's a movement analogous to that in which so much stress is laid in the tantric process, the awakening of the kundalini. The energy coiled up and latent in the body, and it's mounting through the spinal cord and the centers and the brahmacharya to meet the divine above. In our yoga, it's not a specialized process, but a spontaneous, natural uprush of the whole lower consciousness, coming in currents or waves, sometimes in less concrete motion, and on the other side, a descent of the divine consciousness and its force from above into the body. The body becomes the place where all this happens. Your body goes through a process that has been there since the beginning of time, that has been available to humanity and probably was much more easily allowed in other traditions, if the survival requirements of their lives allowed it. You can't have somebody in a survival situation go into samadhi or have abnormal experiences in the tribe when they're organizing to hunt for the next elephant or giraffe or whatever they're eating. So it's in this time that this process can be more freely moving, but it's also this time that there's so much more fear, there's so much more conditioning than in the simpler times of humanity. So it's a movement, a descent from above, and a response from below, or it's a movement from below that evokes a descent from above. That's the basis of Sri Aurobindo's teachings. Where did it happen? He experienced it himself. He doesn't talk a lot about it, but he really recognized that the tantric path was closer to the true path than the Vedic path, the path of the sannyasi. That the incorporation of the body in the process was what was necessary if this was going to stick, if it was going to be able to create a new humanity. That means for you as an individual, that you're part of a collective awakening. You're part of an evolutionary transition. Your own experience, your own insights, your own developing maturity goes beyond whatever the religions of the past have taught you. It becomes the immediate and direct experience of an unfolding of forces that we in the veil of our outer adhara cannot know. Only when we transition, after we have pierced the veil and we've entered into what is the other side of the veil, and it's there that the universe begins to reveal all the principles that I speak of, all the planes of consciousness, all the domains that have been here all along to support the possible unfolding of the human species and this planet. For it, too, to become a Satchamandir. Should that be possible? Is that unheard of? Planet Earth becoming a temple for the Supreme? What would that look like? It's good to have an imaginings, to open up the space for a possibility that is that latent in what we're experiencing right now. The descent is felt as a pouring in of calm, peace, force, and power, stillness and silence, of light and joy, a descending down, a pressure on your head, on your shoulders, a density as it enters into a body that is not yet able to hold it, a solidity, a density, a heaviness that comes in can be often mistaken as depression or exhaustion. It brings with it the wideness and freedom and knowledge of a divine being or a presence Sometimes one of these, sometimes several of them are all together. The movement of the ascension has different results. It may liberate the consciousness so that one feels no longer stuck in the body, but above it, or else spread in wideness with the body, either almost non-existent or only a point in one's free expanse. It may enable the being or some part of the being to go out from the body and move elsewhere, and this action is usually accompanied by some kind of partial samadhi or trance. Or it may be the result of empowering the consciousness, no longer limited by the body and the habits of the external nature, to go within, to enter the inner mental depths, the inner vital, the inner subtle physical, the psychic, to become aware of its innermost psychic self or its innermost mental, vital, and subtle physical being. And it may be to move and live in the domains that these control, the worlds that correspond to these parts of our nature. So that was where I started the journey. I started the journey by diving in. The whole journey for me was inward. And then by going inward, that's when I crossed into the subtle dimensions. The subtle physical, the lower vital, the higher vital, the lower mental, the higher mental, the higher transcendent intelligence, the transcendent awareness, the overmind, the introduction to moments of absolute, that which goes beyond the overmind, the formless quality, holds the purposeful potentiality of existence. All of these are places like this is a place. All of these had a comparable reality for each of the frequencies that we're learning to inhabit. When the body, we pierce the veil, we enter into domains that are not usually accessible to us. A strong boundary between our physical embodiment and these dimensions has to be pierced. And we can only bring these back as if we've been able to bring it into our body enough. Otherwise, it's just blankness. You're just out. You're just gone. You don't know where you were. But in time, the connection can be built between those. For me, what helped was I journaled. That every time I transitioned into another domain, right as soon as I could, I wrote it, or if I couldn't, later on, I got a little portable recorder, and when I came out of it, I recorded it. I have these recordings. I probably have 100 of them. And they all spoke from the place I had just come from. So each is a reflection of the dark, deep components of each of these domains, the subtle physical, high and low, the dark, vital domains. I lived in those for many months. The transcendent domains of the vital, the transcendent domains of the awareness, of the mental and the intellect, even glimmers of the gods. The overmind is where all the gods are. There was this inner exchange that would occur, and I knew that my intelligence had not yet built up a link between what had happened, so I wrote. All of that enriched my ability to see this, to recognize this in my work now. And so it did for sure, Arvindo. Yeah. It is the repeated and constant ascent of the lower consciousness that enables the mind, vital, and physical to come into touch with the higher planes up to the supramental and get impregnated with their light and power and influence. And in the repeated and constant descent of the divine consciousness and its force, that the means of the transformation of the whole being and the whole nature. Once this descent becomes habitual, the divine force, the power of the mother, begins to work, no longer from above only or from behind the veil, but consciously in the adhara itself, and deals with its difficulties and possibilities and carries on to yoga. We're in that stage, in the stage of the applied science, of training the ego to align with these principles so that at some point may or not happen. Not everyone is required to know these domains. It is only for those who are to teach from this way that they would be required. And it's not because I wanted it, it's because it was there in the original design, as it will be for you. The ultimate realization is so simple, it would be unrecognizable by an outer personality. It is the most ubiquitous quality of being, the most primal, unchanging principle that we're blind to. That which is in our face, the very thing that could see or experience anything, is it itself. All the rest of it is the training and the enhancing of the possibility of the Tara to become an instrument of channel of the Supreme in this dimension and in any other dimension that is called to serve. All right, well, there's a little piece, tiny fraction, barely a page, of this Letters of Yoga. So I thought I'd just take a little time and open it up to any of you who'd like to come forward and share. And then after that, we'll speak to some issues here in the program I wanted to speak to, or we wanted to speak to. Okay, so how you do this? Well, you have a microphone sitting around, somebody has it. There she is. Everybody has a microphone. And you just come up. Then you got to, unfortunately, we have this barrier between us, but that's all right. There is no barrier between us. Just imagine no barrier. And come up and just speak. And maybe it's good to stand to one side so that you can see the audience and you can see me at the same time. Because otherwise I look at your back or they look at your back. So come up over here. Yeah. And you could sit in this chair, in fact, because I think you could probably
actually,
see.
you can't.
You can't see.
But
all right. We'll give it a try.
Can you do gallery view up there? Yeah, so people can stand here and they can still see.
But also, I want them to be able to speak to the room,
well,
too.
Then they can turn around.
Yeah, I think let's do that. All right, there you go. Whoever comes forward, you get to be the guinea pig. On this corner, yeah. All right. Anybody? Yeah, give it a moment. Organize yourself. Ellie, good.
I can barely walk right now.
Okay, come on over here. Yeah, so you can see both me in the room.
That work? Place?
You are in the right place, no matter what the camera says.
Oh, I think I need to. All right.
Absolutely. Tadarsa, can you bring up the chair for her, this chair, so you can sit?
To see her.
It's all right.
Okay.
Everyone can see her. Just sit right there. Yeah, right where you are. Just sit. Yeah, we're going to have to do this. It's too hard to stand.
I don't know if I can talk.
I know, but it's a million words. It's everything, Ellie. I get it. It's all moving right now. It's the cry of recognizing the diminishment, the habit of keeping ourselves small, of not being able to choose to step into the fullness, in the recognition of all that which is both in the way is simultaneously evidence of your divine nature coming forward.
When you talked about, well, mucking it up. I related to that because my work has just been so demanding, so demanding. And one of the reasons I felt called to do the yoga of manifestation course is to try and get beyond whatever is making it so demanding.
That's right. Exactly right words. The demand is the resistance, is an effect of a cause of our historical unwillingness or incapacity or imagined incapacity, where we'd rather stay asleep, rather not. The preferences, all the habits, the little structures of everyday life, where we keep ourselves in the smallness. It's a battlefield. You're in it right now.
And like I remember when I first came to you, it was before I was working full time as a Waldorf teacher. And I was really in touch with that inner self. I was really in touch with that deep devotion and that desire. I mean, that's the motivation of my life.
It's right there right now. It didn't go anywhere, Ellie. It's right here with you, sharing how hard it is to bring this into your life.
Yes.
That's what allows you to do this.
And I've heard you tell people to do something simple, you know, so that you can really give your all to this, what's happening or what's trying to happen. And I've done the very opposite. And I don't know what to do. I don't know.
Just be right where you are in this moment in your body, feeling the anguish. This is the fullness of the dejection. It's the meeting of all the incapacities with a greater capacity that is yet to manifest. Ellie, this is what takes you beyond that. Be right where you are, my dear. It is no other place to be than where you are in this moment. This is the most important a moment here, right now. Let it in. Let it happen. When we move towards the dejection, when we choose the dejection, like we're seeing Ellie do. Of course, I don't think she chose it. The divine in her chose it. Of course, that's who chooses our dejection always. We get cast into an opportunity to know the Supreme. Ellie's being taken across the threshold. I'm speaking of piercing the veil. She's long ago pierced the veil, but now she's crossing the threshold. In her simple loyalty and persistent recognition of the opportunity here, she has come to this point of stepping across a threshold that separates her from her divine nature. This is what it looks like. So just hold this and know that it's held and recognized, honored, the human and the divine. This is what it feels like. The demand is not a demand like in an ordinary what our ego does with demand. It's a determination to become you. It's the insistence. It's telling you, Ellie, enough wasted time. Come forward. Let me come forward in you. You don't have to change anything outwardly. It'll take care of it like this. And you bring that and share it just like you did. This is very powerful transmission because she's at the crack of the universe. She's right there at the threshold.
It's- That's all
I got it. Exhausting. So if you can carry it, you can hand it to Giddy Pretty, and she'll pass it on to the next person. Thank you, Ellie. What a gift on this first residential program. You just brought in the Supreme in this space. It was a sacred act. It is honored. Thank you. How little we know who we are. How little do we know what we are. It's in our greatest vulnerability.
Namaste. Wanted to perfect segue, Ellie. Thank you, because I started to feel like I was going to pass out myself, and I have a lot of shaking happening. And for me, what's happening is there's quite a bit happening in the torso, like the liver and the kidneys, and it's been there for quite some time. And a lot of head pain, the base of the skull and the third eye and the throat. Even my heart's pounding. What I realize is that there's this transformation of taking my power back. And I just noticed, like even today when I had a meeting earlier, even right now, that this flares up. And it's also, I'm in touch with this fear of seeing, like I keep myself blocked in the third eye because I don't want to see, because then I will have to speak. And I have fear around, which is not necessarily my experience in this life, but being kicked out or whatever that is. And
it's simultaneously the fear of seeing and the fear of being seen. The paradox of those two things simultaneously, that if we see them, they'll see us. Mm-hmm. And there's a power in that. One of the ways that we most take in someone else is through our eyes. And through our eyes is linked directly to the third chakra. And that's when we both can get sucked in, or when someone else can actually be impacted. So the idea of turning our attention through our eyes is a power for us in terms of what we make real. And if fear is there, then we'll be afraid of what our power might create in another if they see us seeing them.
Yes, and what I'm noticing in this community for myself is, like, this has been recent for me, is this, like, I wasn't conscious that I was withholding, like, myself until recently. And then I started to notice that as I started to speak, like, this started to loosen up for me. A new
thing started coming forward.
Yeah. And so all of this is happening at the same time. And it's very, like, embodied, like it's very much happening in the body.
So how is that? Now you're right there, you're speaking from that place. What are you noticing?
Yeah, it's still the same, like the trembling. I can feel this releasing, like the fear. I can feel the softening in the upper chakras, but there's still quite a bit of shaking happening.
Okay. Well, it's new territory. You're on the skinny branches. You're outside of the domain of your comfort zone, at least here, and in terms of the powers and the forces that are at work. So, Gitananda, Can you speak up the speaker? I'm having a little trouble with the echo. Yeah. So when you speak, I can hear you through the speaker too.
Yeah, and it's fascinating because it doesn't feel like the experience in this life, like it's something that I took in that's playing out because I'm in a specific community set up in this
You
way.
know, you brought something with you from another life. Many of you have an attainment, a capacity that you brought with you, and that it's there latent. It has not yet. Some of you has not yet really had its time on the stage, but at some point you're going to recover the old territory that you left behind in the past life, and it will come forward this life. It'll be an automatic pull or a capacity, a psychic ability of knowing, an ability to speak in ways that has a certain power to it. Each will carry something of what you brought into this life to contribute. So that authority is a reflection that you were in a role like I am, where you influenced and directed others in much greater authority than perhaps you've been able to manifest in the outer world this life.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
I feel
almost a startling capacity. And the other part of it was that eagerness to learn how to come into this life in whatever ways seem to be serving that. You bring an eagerness to come back to what it is that you know at some level is already yours.
Yeah.
So then that needs to happen. And that is happening.
And I think for me, at least now, what I notice is happening is me needing to bring this forward.
Yeah.
And we had a meeting earlier, and that was just a demonstration of it. We met like for spiritual inquiry, and I was like, I realized that after I was a bit in shock of like, wow.
You just got the job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also want to name the fear and the doubt. So I just want to come clean with everyone that like it's this also, I brought the doubt of like, is this going to be able to be something I can grow into here? So I just want to name it.
Here's the secret. Just be in love. Be in your heart. Not because what you have is an awareness city. You just want to bring that power and authority, which is in your belly and in your six, and put it in your heart. When you start speaking, speak from here, even as a conscious place to speak. Speak from your heart, and everything will come forward and serve the higher. Because there is already a surrender, a humility, a bowing to the magnificence and the sacredness. There is this huge vulnerability. It's all there too.
Yeah.
The power and the vulnerability live right next to each other.
And
Two
it's such a
sides.
thrill.
Yes.
Thank you. I just needed to bring that forward.
That's good. See, we're creating the chapter 19 here too. It's everywhere we turn.
Yeah.
We're showing the paradox. We're showing the dualities. We're showing what it is to be the space and what it means to be a human being in time and space and how to work with that. So we have to grow as human beings. We have to come out of the shroud of the habit of ourselves. We have to relinquish the things we believed would be true. We have to have no other home but where we are now, here. And then no matter where we are, it makes no difference. We're not here to preserve the Adhara, to make it feel safe. We're here to bring forward a new kind of being where safety is not the question, where fear is not the question, where being heard is not the question. It's a whole different consciousness that's whole and complete within itself. And then wherever you are, you're communicating that freedom, that trustworthiness, that worthiness in a way that they feel that for themselves. You create the safe space by being that safe space that you've found. When that's found in the human, that is what we're seeking to make happen. Because when you are the embodied expression of that, you then are the new humanity. And the power and the cry of the world is going to be able to receive it in ways that in no other time could it receive it. So be you, just all of you. Trust in that. I have complete faith in it. All right, so there you have it. We're going to just go forward and sit in our silence and stillness. And we will gather again and bring up whatever else is there to bring forward in our next session. Oh, I never even brought my phone out. Here it comes out of its cradle. So just 5 minutes. Hari Om Tat Sat. Hari Om Tat Sat. Hari Om Tat Sat Shri. All glory to Supreme. May truth and love manifest. Namaste.